So again, thank you all for being here. Thanks to our panelists also. We have some gifts for you at the end, but thank you very much for coming. I'll do a brief intro for everybody here. So Dr. Jennifer Glass is an assistant professor here at the School of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. She has her Bachelor's of Science in both Oceanography and Earth and Space Sciences. She did her PhD at Arizona State in Geological Sciences, and she postdoced at Caltech. Dr. Amanda Stockton had her Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry and Aerospace Engineering, Master's in Chemistry, Doctorate in Chemistry from Berkeley, and she postdoced at JPL. She's an assistant professor here in the School of Chemistry with a dual appointment at the Bioengineering program. And Dr. Susanna Widicus-Weaver, who had her Bachelor's of Science in Chemistry at Illinois Wesleyan, her doctorate of chemistry at Caltech, and a postdoc at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And she's currently at Emory in the School of Chemistry. So I thought we'd do an icebreaker first. So if each of you could answer, if there was a high-impact journal of negative results, what would be your most cited paper?
So luckily they gave us these questions ahead of time, so I thought about this for the last couple days. So I would have a lot from my own experiments, but they said most highly cited, which is always review papers. So I would write a review paper on all the sources of contamination in different experiments that people should be aware of, even like their lab water and things like that. And also perhaps a table of prominent studies that have been shown to be artifacts, some that we know, some that we aren't as infamous or famous. So I think that would get a lot of citations. It would get a lot of hate too, but it would get some citations.
Would you please write that review? I'll help. Along those lines, as an analytical chemist, there's a lot of ways you can try to make something work and have it not work. And it turns out that if you don't publish the ways it doesn't work, more and more grad students are going to waste their time trying those ways again and again. So I think the list of all of the different reagents that don't result in very good MEKC separations of carboxylic acids would be a pretty good one.
Mine's actually a real paper. I have tenure. I can say these things now. So the big result from my PhD thesis was a tentative detection of an interstellar molecule, and it was the first ketose potentially detected in space. We wrote it very carefully. We hedged our bets. We said it was tentative. We did all the right things. And then another group followed up a couple of years later and published more observations that showed that it wasn't there. And people thought I would be devastated because they thought this was like the centerpiece of my thesis project. But in astrochemistry, if you're looking for a new molecule in space, you basically keep looking line by line by line until there's one that's missing. And then you know it's not really the molecule that you thought it was. And so this is not unusual in this field, but I think probably my most highly cited negative result is one that was actually published and turned out to not be correct. So there you go.
Very much. So the first real question, I guess. So could you point to a couple of key decisions in your career, why you made those, and what would have happened if you didn't make them? So key inflection points in your early career.
Okay, so I think for me, the first thing is that I was willing to change fields a lot. As you heard, all my degrees are in geology, and yet I really feel more like a microbiologist at this point, dabbling in biochemistry as well. And so I think the interdisciplinary aspect of, starting out in geology and isotope geochemistry, and then I switched in, to work on cyanobacteria and nitrogen fixation, and I switched again to work on methane in the deep sea, and then, starting my own lab, I've obviously switched into a lot of offshoots of that as well. That, I think, would be a key decision, definitely, or just a key kind of passion I guess I'm kind of, as if you know me, you know I'm have a little issues with focus and ADHD, and just I love to think about a lot of things at once, for better or worse. And so I think I would have done that anyway. That's my personality. But I think that in some ways that really has benefited me, although at other times it was really good to focus to get through grad school, things like that. And something I want to throw out there, because this is a lot about graduate school, and I know that mental health comes up a lot, and I think a key decision I made early on in grad school was to seek help for my anxiety and depression, which is so prevalent, and I had issues with that as well, and still do. I mean, it's a lifelong thing, as many of you probably know. So I think that was very key, was seeking help and continuing to seek help. So I can talk more about that if anybody wants.
Thank you. I have kind of similar key points as Jen here, having also a number of different backgrounds that don't necessarily correlate directly with what I do today, with a undergraduate degree in aerospace engineering, but needing to know some geology and microbiology at this point without having necessarily taken any biology classes since high school. There's been a lot of ongoing learning. One thing that I would like to point out is that from where you're at now to where you want to be, there are many different paths, and you can take any number of those paths as long as you keep options open. I originally thought that my end goal was to work at JPL and send stuff to Mars, but once I got to JPL, I realized my true passion included that early stage development that you can really only do easily in academia. A place like a NASA center is great for higher TRL development, but that super cutting edge, high risk, high reward development is much more easily tackled from an academic environment. Another thing is changing paths is not failure. I started with a PhD program at Brown University in pharmaceutical chemistry, which was not what I wanted to be doing, but I thought that I wanted to do that. Changing my mind and leaving with a master's was not failure. It was a redirection towards what I actually wanted to do, and don't be afraid to make those sorts of decisions. If you are interested in something, pursue it. I originally was only interested in aerospace engineering. I got distracted by chemistry. It is what has given me the opportunity to have the career that I have today. If you are interested in it, go for it and make it work in the long run. And then finally, along the lines of what Jen was saying about mental health, find something outside of your day job that you actually enjoy doing. Your best creative moments will likely come out of exploring those other creative avenues in your brain.
There's so many pivotal points in my career that I could point to that were turning points for me, and we could be here all day, so I won't do that. But I can say that the decision that I made between graduate school and my postdoc position was huge. I also thought I wanted a job at NASA. I actually went to Caltech in grad school. I went to the JPL spectroscopy group and did a lot of my laboratory work in graduate school. I knew them very well. I saw their day-to-day activities, and I thought, this is great. I could get a job at a NASA lab. I wasn't sure I wanted to teach, and so this seemed like the best fit for me. And then sometime around my 4th year in graduate school, I realized I actually really enjoyed teaching. And I also started to talk to my friends at JPL and realized that to have the academic freedom to work on the science I really wanted to work on, I needed a different job than a job at a NASA lab. You can tailor a job at a NASA lab to give you that freedom, but it's somewhat challenging to work yourself into the right level of position to have that. When you're first starting out, in particular, you typically are given a project related to a mission or a contract, and that's what you have to work on. And so when I would go to visit the lab at JPL, they would have their NASA job from 9 to 5, and then they'd eat dinner, and then they'd stay late and work on their own research after hours. And I realized at that point that I didn't want that sort of life for myself, that I wanted the freedom to work on whatever science interested me at whatever time I wanted to work on it. So I ended up going into academia for 2 reasons. One, I actually really did like teaching, and 2, because I realized that best fit with what I needed career-wise in terms of allowing me the chance to do the things that I wanted to do. And I was sitting here thinking I hadn't thought about the mental health aspect in relation to this question, but I will say another major turning point for me was when I was a postdoc. I was struggling with life choices. Being a research academic is really challenging. I was getting ready to go on the job market. I wasn't sure I could do it. Imposter syndrome is real. If you don't know what that phrase means, look it up. I guarantee everyone in this room has experienced this at least once in your life, probably as grad students on a daily basis. The deep secret of academic research is professors still have imposter syndrome, even after they get tenure, almost every day. It's normal. There are ways to deal with it. You can do it. You just have to tell yourself you can do it and try anyway, and ignore the little voice in your head that says that you're a fraud and they're all going to figure you out. So along with taking care of yourself in terms of mental health, remind yourself that you got into grad school for a reason. You are a very talented individual and you can do the things that you set out to do in your career, and don't let anybody tell you otherwise.
Maybe some people should have more imposter syndrome. So what do you think the grad students often miss that they should be taking more note of at this point in our careers, everyone's careers?
All right. I said, I think that the importance of becoming very comfortable with rejection and failure, that's something that's come up. And along with that, seeking out constructive criticism, because, and you've all heard this many times probably, you're all well, not all of you are type A, but a lot of you are type A, I'm type A, you know, and, or at least I was before I just got so crazy busy that I couldn't be as organized as I originally was when I had more time. But, you know, we all have very high expectations for ourselves, and we were all probably really good students and got good grades and all these things, right? And then it becomes much more about these bigger things, obviously, than the grades, right? The grades don't matter anymore, and you're not even in classes anymore after you go through comps, right? And so then suddenly it's the papers and the fellowships and these much bigger kind of amorphous things that are very, very competitive with like 5% success rates or something. And so it's very hard. And I think that's where even if you're in a program with great support and, you know, let alone all the other pressures that are on a lot of people outside of academia, but, you know, or inside academia, unfortunately. Anyway, talk more about that. But, you know, getting used to it's going to be a very low success rate and it's very competitive, and so you just gotta. Now I kind of joke that now I just always expect everything's going to be rejected, and then I'm like, oh wow, it wasn't rejected, or it was only rejected, but it's encouraged to be resubmitted. That's like awesome, because I expected it to be rejected with no encouragement for that's my go-to a priori thing. So then everything, I tell that to everybody in my lab, so they've heard that before. But and same with grants. So, you know, so then it really does. That's how I trick myself into kind of being more excited about everything. Is so, because I'll tell you a story. So I was Ariel Anvar, some of you know him. I was his student, so I think he's heard the story. If not, if he's watching, I think he's heard it before. But my first paper to get rejected, I think it was like my first paper, maybe second paper in grad school, and then I got like 3 rejected in a row, and each one, and it was like kind of back to back, like with every 6 months it was happening, and I just did the completely wrong thing. Like I didn't tell Ariel for months because it came to my email, and I was like so embarrassed about it and so just anxious and just terrified that I just didn't tell him for months. And don't do that. Just that's the thing about finally he was like he's like, whatever happened with that paper? He was tenured obviously at this point, and I said, yeah, about that. it got rejected. And he's like, it's been a long time. I'm like, mm-hmm. He's like, when did it get rejected? I'm like, 3 months ago. And he's like, Jen, you have to tell me these things. I could, if it was really, depending on how the reviews were, I could contact the editor. I mean, usually those things don't go through, and you don't want to bug editors about things, and you don't want your advisors to bug most editors about things. But you do want, your advisor is your advisor, and they want to help you, or most of them. Most of them really do want to help you, and so use them for that, and really do ask for their opinion. Even if you think that, you know what you're doing, they know they've been in this longer, and they will help you through it. So, or ask other grad students, or other people on your committee or something. I know there's some, sometimes there's some advisor issues, but ask somebody for help, and seek out constructive criticism. That was kind of a long story. Sorry. There.
I like that. I started off from day one, every proposal with the 10% acceptance rate. Of course, everything that you send, you watch it fly away, and it's gone. And if it comes back, that's awesome. But otherwise, it's goodbye proposal. All right, so what do I think graduate students often miss? You should start networking like right now. Oh, did I? I'm so sorry. I have a kind of a story to go along with this also of basically I got my postdoc position because I had developed a network already with the team at JPL that was doing similar things to what my PhD was doing. And it turned out that we needed someone to go transfer technology from Berkeley to JPL, and so my boss was on the phone with one of the guys at JPL, and I was like, hey, ask him if he needs a postdoc. And so my boss says, hey, do you need a postdoc? Yeah, okay. Yeah, he needs a postdoc. And then after that, I was working at JPL in the clean rooms, and it turned out that whenever we had a process that would fail at our clean rooms, we would send it to Georgia Tech to be done in the clean rooms here. So whenever I heard that they were looking for a professor doing kind of like what I wanted to do, it was kind of a no-brainer. Like, yes, pick me. I want to work at those clean rooms. So that network that you develop is really important. I'll let you tell your stories about networking.
Yeah, networking, I think, is the number one thing. And I know it's really intimidating as a student to just walk up to somebody at a conference and introduce yourself, but it's the best thing you could possibly do for your career. Because if you see these people at multiple conferences, they start to remember who you are. And then when they see you give a talk, they remember your science. And this develops into a group of people who can support you for the rest of your career. One of my colleagues at Emory told me after I started there that one of the things they really liked about my application was the fact that based on the letters, they could tell I had the networking level of somebody that was already tenured. Because astrochemistry is a pretty small field, and I had gone to all the meetings, I had met all the people, they knew me, they knew my work, and so when I was on the job market, people could call up someone related to astrochemistry and ask them about me, and they all knew my name. And that is absolutely the most important thing that you can do. The other part, I guess, that I would say for this question is be meticulous. Quadruple check all of your work. If it's going to be deposited somewhere permanently, you want to make sure that it's right. So check your slides for conference talks, check your papers, and if you make a mistake, admit you make a mistake and correct it. And you'll get a lot of respect from people in the field for that, for admitting when you mess up. Everybody messes up. It's okay.
And don't wait 3 months to tell your advisor that your paper got rejected.
Okay, good. So could you sum up your career advice in a couple of sentences? So if you had to roll all of that into a couple of sentences, a nice little Tootsie Roll of goodness, what would it be?
All right. This is just something that I have to say that I'll just answer the question with. Just don't read anything into emails. It's very tempting to, believe me, I psychoanalyzed every one of Ariel Onbar's emails for 5 years, as my husband can tell you. And just don't, it's not worth it. It's, they don't ever mean what you think they mean, like in the tone that you think they mean. It's just, email is just such a difficult form of communication. And if somebody doesn't email you back right away, that means absolutely nothing about you. It's not all about you, or it's not all about me, Jen. So, yeah, just don't read into emails, but do a really good job, and proofread your emails and write really strong emails, but don't ever take anything personal from an email, basically. But also don't ever write anything personal in an email, because as we know now these days, with all the lawyers out there and everybody seeing everything, and your university can read all your emails at any time, so just don't ever say anything nasty in an email.
Fair enough. I guess it is what you make it. If you keep a positive attitude and keep your head up and take every bit of advice as though it was intended positively, even if you think perhaps it wasn't, just get rid of the negative thoughts and be like, that's good advice. I'll take that and I'll keep going. Give everyone else the benefit of the doubt, but especially give yourself the benefit of the doubt would be my big one. Go easy on yourself, and it should all work out as long as you realize that there are multiple ways to get to point B over there, and a couple of twists and turns are fine.
I would say, if I was going to sum it up, work hard but take care of yourself. Meet people and do the best work that you can do and get your name and your science out there, and the rest will take care of itself. But also believe in yourself, because if you think you're not qualified so you just don't apply, you'll never know if you could have gotten that postdoc or that fellowship or that job. So give it a go. A lot of other people that are very much less qualified than you will apply for that job, so you should too. Trust me, I read applications now. A lot of people who are very much less qualified than you will apply for that job.
Some of the feedback that we got already was that we had only academics up here. So if you have any industry questions, I'm sure that they all know some things about industry, and we'll take questions now.
Thank you. So speaking about transition to industry, doing a PhD in extremely difficult and sometimes a narrow field mean that as a PI, you have to do everything you can for success for your students within academia. And the truth is, many of the postgraduates here will go into fields outside of academia, and not necessarily in industry, something even beyond it. So do you think PIs are doing enough to prepare their students to that possibility, transition outside of academia?
I guess I have the microphone, I'll go first. Graduate school is not necessarily always about the specific details of the science that you're working on. Graduate school is about learning how to troubleshoot, how to problem solve, and how to think critically. And it doesn't matter what your PhD is in. If you learn those skills, you can transfer that to any job anywhere in the world. I have a lot of friends who graduated with me that are not doing anything related to what they did in their PhD. Half of my job is not related to anything I did in my PhD. Half my job's people management. Nothing ever trains you for that in graduate school, and yet it's probably the most important skill that I could have for my job. So if you know how to troubleshoot, you know how to think critically, and you know how to problem solve, you're going to be fine no matter where you are. They're looking for what comes with the degree, not the specific training that you had in most cases.
So this is regarding TRLs, technological readiness. Yeah. So we see in astrobiology, we have these large missions going out into the solar system and so forth, but a lot of times they're vulnerable because of the large ticket price to administrative whims, especially inside of the sphere of NASA. I feel strongly that we should diversify and try to be more innovative and more economical. But I'd like to hear what suggestions you might have for getting through the Valley of Death, the TRL Valley of Death.
Okay, so the reorganization of the ROSE's proposal structure was intended to eliminate the Valley of Death by going from the ASTID and A-steps over to the Picasso and Matisse that's supposed to bridge that gap, where Picasso is TRL 1 to 3. Does everyone in here know what TRL is? Okay, a couple of people. TRL is technology readiness level. It goes from 1, I can write it on a napkin, up to 10, I've flown it multiple times and it has worked. What used to happen is there was good support for low TRL development, and then there was good support for taking it from 6 up to flight. But that gap in here between I have demonstrated it in the laboratory and I can show that it would work in space, that gap was not well covered. And that is supposed to be covered now by the Matisse program, which is the maturation of instruments for solar system exploration, I think. Anyone in here have any experience with art history? Because Picasso versus Matisse sounds like somebody who had a degree in art history came up with that. Anyway, so Picasso is now anything can enter at TRL 1 to 3, and it's supposed to exit with at least TRL elevation of 1. And then Matisse is anything can enter between, I think, 3 and 6. It's supposed to get everything up to 6 by the end. Whenever you go up for a big mission, you have to come in at TRL 6. TRL 6 means that you have demonstrated that it can work in an analog environment, which does not mean full system ready to go to space, but I've shaken it, I've vibrated it, I've vacuumed it all the way out, I've run it upside down, I've done all these other sorts of things. That doesn't answer your question fully, because we still have multi-generational missions with a political cycle that goes over at least every 8 years, if not 4. So I don't know how to answer that question fully, but the new funding structure is supposed to help with that.
Hey there. So as women, how do you balance the difference between criticism that's constructive and that is somewhat discriminatory? Give us a panel of women.
I'm sure Jen will have something that is much more constructive to say here. In my own personal sanity, I've tended to just assume everything is constructive. Just throw it all over there in that box in my brain and deal with it a different time.
That's great. I think that's a very positive attitude. Everything is constructive. Everything's going to get rejected, but everything is constructive. I think that's a good way of approaching situations. I like that. This pops into mind in terms of imposter syndrome. But first of all, I do want to say for for all of you that I think imposter syndrome is pretty universal. And of course, there's ingrained things as women in society. We definitely are expected to act one way, but men are expected to act another way. And then, of course, there's non-binary and trans, and so it's very complicated. And we all have our own unique, dilemmas. But I guess what this makes me think of. Kind of a moment, and I was thinking of this when you were talking about networking and getting out there, and because I kind of did a lot of that as a late PhD student, and I actually got a little bit of flack for it from some very few. It overwhelmingly helped me, but there were a couple senior men in the field who, grumpy, will not be named, but who kind of said, why are you offering to do these review papers and, be on this committee or this committee, you need to focus on your research. And Do that after tenure, which is of course what you hear constantly. Wait to do that till after tenure. Wait to do that till after tenure. So, and I do think that comment was probably a little bit more directed to me as a woman than maybe than my just from having seen how they then treated the equivalent, but. I think this is why it's so important to have lots of networks and to kind of surround yourself by this amazing community, I think, because it really is an amazing early career community and a lot more diverse, obviously, than the faculty often. So you guys all need to really support each other and, help each other. And then, once one of you gets hired, keep the other ones coming up. We've done very well for white women, as you can see. Now we need to get more diverse. They'll acknowledge it. We're all white women, you're right. So now we need to get much more diverse diversity. Yep.
Now the one with tenure gets to talk. Before tenure, most of the time I just let it go. I mean, you pick your battles. If it was really over the top ridiculous, I would contact the editor or the program officer or someone. Had a lot of behind the scenes discussions with friends at conferences about how to handle something somebody said, those sorts of things. On occasion, you go in the bathroom and lock yourself in the stall and have a good cry and then go back out in the hallway and you're fine, right? That was one talk in particular when I was a grad student. But once I got tenure, so at Emory in chemistry, I was the first woman to get tenure and stay. And so not because of any dysfunction in our department, just because of the way things happened. That's just how it turned out. And it's been a weird transition for me, because I was also, the year after I got tenure, I had a son, and I was the first woman in 22 years to take maternity leave in my department, and they didn't even know which paperwork we needed to fill out. It was really, really complicated, unnecessarily. And so that raised a lot of things that I had never had to deal with in my career before, and there were comments made that were innocent that needed to be addressed, and I addressed them, and on some occasions my colleagues addressed them on my behalf before I had a chance to say anything. But now I feel like, as a woman with the security of tenure in a male-dominated field, in a male-dominated department, it is my job to step up and say something, because if I don't, there isn't anybody else who will. And so I am fighting battles now that I never would have fought before, everywhere from my department to my university to funding agencies to journals, all the way up. I send emails I probably shouldn't send, though I do live by the philosophy. Eric Herbst once told me, never write it in an email if you don't want it on the front of the New York Times, and that is the best advice I've ever gotten. But I send emails that I never would have sent before I got tenure. I have phone conversations with program officers that I never would have had before I got tenure, because I feel like I have to, and I'm in a place where I can, and I should. And so use the level that you're at to help the people coming up behind you, and it will continue to get better. Okay. And if you need somebody to give you advice, send it to one of us. Yeah.
I don't exactly use the level. That's beautifully said. And it's not that you can't write strongly worded, passionate things in an email, that you really feel. It's just never write anything snarky that you don't want on the New York Times. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just women that stand up for women or underrepresented minorities that stand up for underrepresented minorities. It's everyone in this room standing up for everyone else in the community.
There are allies out there, you just have to find them, which is where the networking comes in. Some are obvious and some are not, but they're there.
So I just wanted to go back to your points earlier about networking and such. So in my current situation, I'm a rising second-year master's student, and I'm trying to keep my options open for next semester while I'm applying to different PhD programs and such. And I found a lot of universities in which their programs that they support and offer are really interesting to me. But I was looking for some advice on how to navigate talking to different professors at that university. How do I figure out if I fit in with their group versus, if my research is really applicable to what they're doing, and how do I prepare myself for that sort of icebreaker conversation to sort of figure and navigate all of that?
Now I get to put on my Director of Graduate Studies hat. So the best thing you can do is look up everything you can about a particular professor you're interested in and send them an email, a very carefully worded email that tells them who you are, what your experience is, what you're interested in, and ask them if they're looking for students in their group. And anybody who's actually serious about advising graduate students will respond to an email like that as quickly as they can and tell you honestly whether or not they're taking students the next year. And if it's me, I'll send you a link to our graduate application. If you aren't sure if it's a good fit for you, you can ask questions. You can track down their students at conferences. That's a really good way to find out information about a group. Every group has a personality, and you need to figure out if it's a good match for you. Every program I've ever seen in science will bring you in to visit before you have to make a decision about graduate school. So go to the recruiting weekends, ask a lot of questions, get the students aside when the faculty member is not there, and ask them what it's like to work for their advisor. If they won't tell you, there's a problem. I actually shove my students towards people and say, I'm going to go get something to eat and I'll be back in 10 minutes, because I want them to talk to my students when I'm not there. Not everybody will do that. So yeah, but you should definitely reach out. So the summer before I applied to graduate school, I emailed probably 30 different faculty members or more. Some of them wrote back, some of them didn't. Some of them I was really interested in, and so I tried multiple times. One of those ended up being my graduate advisor. Anybody who's worked with him knows it takes 3 or 4 tries sometimes to get a response. And it just worked out. I could tell from the responses who I was interested in and who I wasn't.
Can I also ask, at your point in applying and such, did you already have research question and a project that you had thought up on your own? Or, okay.
Most faculty have grant funding for specific projects, and they will want to plug you into that unless you come with your own fellowship money.
Okay, gotcha.
So, yeah.
Thank you. That's really insightful.
I would say that I'm always really impressed. And also remember to always attach your CV to the first email. Just send it out. It doesn't hurt. And I'm always really impressed. And now remember, I'm a geologist, and I don't know if it's different in chemistry, but geology and microbiology, I think, too. I think it's often really good for you to talk about how you could kind of see yourself fitting into a certain project, or at least show that you've read their papers, and you're actually really interested in, their work in some sort, of way. And it doesn't at all have to be it's not committing to a certain project. It's just kind of showing how you might be able to see yourself fitting in. That will really set you, especially if there's somebody you're really interested in, that will really set you above the bar, because most people don't do that. It's usually form letters. So if you write a really personalized, same for the job market, you want your cover letters always to be personalized for that place, not just form letters.
One other thing I forgot to mention is, if you've been communicating with a specific faculty member and they're really interested in you as a student, when they get to the point of doing admissions, whoever's in charge of admissions will probably have that info, and that will get your file reviewed in the first round of application review. And so if they really want you, they're going to go find the admissions chair and they're going to tell them, I really want this student, find their file and admit them right now. So I get these emails all the time. And so, yeah, if you have that personal contact and they're really impressed with you, and you've had a multiple email exchange, they're going to be looking for your application when it comes in.
I haven't been a professor that long, but I do have one quick story. I had a student call me up. He was a master's student at another university, and he said, "I'd like your job. How do I get it?" And so we started talking, and I thought I was advising a student. I didn't realize I was recruiting a student. And so later, I applied for Georgia Tech, and yes, he's a really great graduate student in my group now. So that worked, apparently.
Do not email the person that's supposedly the nice one in a field and get all sorts of career advice, and then when they offer you admission, go somewhere else and refuse to come and visit, because that happened to me once. I spent months emailing with this student, got them a fellowship, everything, and then they wouldn't even come for recruiting weekend. So don't do that. Yeah, at least go visit. If you've taken the person's time to have an email conversation with them, show up and ask questions. Yep.
And if you are interested in a group, don't totally ignore the group until the day before. They have to sign off saying that they will accept you into their group, because by then it might be too late. General word of advice. Probably I don't need to give it to this room.
Kind of like similar question, but for postdocs, especially for someone who is seeking postdoc in a little bit different area from their PhD, and also what are the to-dos and not to-dos when you're seeking for a postdoc?
So I had a really great mentor who happened to be my husband's PhD advisor. And when I was on the job market for a postdoc position, I didn't know what to write in the letter. And I went to my advisor and he gave me good advice. And then I went to this other advisor and he gave me fantastic advice. And his advice was, always offer to apply for fellowship money. It doesn't matter if you get it, but the fact that you're willing to try, for him, was the cutoff between somebody he would seriously consider and someone he wouldn't. This was a really big name in chemistry. So in groups where they get inundated with postdoc applications, that may very well be the deciding factor as to whether or not your file is considered or not. But I would say, if you can tell the person in a short email why you would be a very good fit for their group and what new skills you would learn from being in their group, that will go a long way to getting their attention. But we get spammed almost daily by mass emails from people who are looking for a postdoc position, and they just go through and email everybody in a department. And I get all these emails that start with, "Dear sir, I would like a postdoc position in your lab. I have extensive experience in medicinal chemistry." And I'm like, I don't understand why this is not what I do. When I'm in a bad mood on occasion, I'll write back and be like, "Why did you email me? This is not what I do." And I am not sir, but so make sure that you get the name right, make sure that you know what they actually do and that you're a good fit for their lab, and you'll get past that initial delete that many of us do because we just get inundated.
I might suggest also query your network, because I think me as a new professor particularly, I'm not necessarily feeling like high-risk situations are a good move for me. But if I have a colleague that I really trust, say my student is graduating, they're looking for a postdoc, that's a lot more of the that seems lower risk, and I think that that's going to be kind of similarly reflected across different things.
Hi. Thank you so much for doing this, by the way. This is very, very insightful. I want to jump on this train also of the networking and also keeping your options open. What would you advise PhD students, to keep their options open on the network while, as it was mentioned earlier, it's a small community for astrobiology, right? Like, how do we, keep our options open, networking?
I think just, it goes a long way just paying attention in the moment. I know this sounds really hokey and hippie or whatever, but a lot of times I'll just say all the things I did wrong and continue to do wrong, but I'm like on my phone or on my computer and kind of not paying attention. And like the people that actually really, and some people in my group are really good about this, you guys know, actually I think everybody is way better than me, like really active listening and, and practicing kind of assimilating information, because there's just so much that's useful all around you all the time. And also, it's just really impressive when someone's like, we can, obviously we can like see you guys in the audience, and the person that's like, you don't have to nod the whole time, but that's like really interested and following along, that actually goes a long way. And that then you're just using all the information that's coming at you. It's not any extra time beyond what you're already doing. And then, I don't know, a lot of it's just serendipity, I think, that, you're going to bump into somebody and, there's probably, 100 different people that you could have potentially a great postdoc with, right? There's not just one person. It's like, like a spouse or whatever. Well, I guess there's different perspectives. So maybe some of you believe there's one person in the universe for each of you. But I think similar with postdoc advisors or PhD advisors, there's probably multiple people in the universe on other exoplanets that would work for your advisor, to be your advisor, right? And so you don't have to go find the one. You just have to find someone who's going to be a good one for you. So don't stress too hard about finding the right match. But also, if you hear something really interesting in a talk, always go up afterwards and talk to that person. And you'd be amazed at how many opportunities open up by just that after, that interchange after a talk. And you don't have to ever follow up with them or do anything. But sometimes amazing things are going to happen. And it's 2 minutes, right? And so that's fine.
I'm sorry, I just have to follow up. Okay, so there's no unique match, but selecting your PhD or postdoc advisor is kind of like having a kid with someone. They're going to be in your life for the rest of your life. No, that's how. Never mind. That's how people get in trouble. And I've completely lost my train of thought. How do you do that?
Thanks. So one of the things that's sort of daunting for me when I envision, the possibility of obtaining and performing well for a tenure track faculty position is that big leap between, having a lot of experience and performing well as a researcher onto large-scale project management, people management, getting a network of collaborators. Do you have any advice for building up that experience in terms of, potentially sort of being thrown into that situation for the first time, and what steps you guys have taken to get that sort of experience?
If you're a grad student, mentor undergrads. If you're a postdoc, mentor grad students and undergrads. It's the best experience that you can get. And if you have a chance to work on an experiment or a project that's starting from the ground up, that also really prepares you well for starting a research group. The challenge with that is you still need papers. So you need to have evidence for your work. I joined a brand new lab as a postdoc, and I would not say that the papers that I got out were high impact, but I got a lot of papers out in those 3 years, despite the fact that it was a brand new group. And my postdoc advisor could say she effectively built my lab. And so they knew when I walked into my position that I had the ability to at least get a lab up and running and get an experiment up and running. But the people skills part, I learned that along the way, and there are 2 people in the audience that can attest to the fact that I didn't get it right all the time, because they started with me the very first year. There's a lot of growing both with students and with faculty, and one of my colleagues told me very early on, students are the most expensive pieces of equipment that you have, all of them work differently and none of them come with an instrument manual. And it's absolutely 100% true. Every student is different and you have to find the right interaction approach with that for advising, and the right motivators and the right things to do as an advisor to help that person become efficient as a scientist. And that's most of my job at this point, that and writing grants and papers. But yeah, you pick up that experience along the way, but you have to kind of seek out those opportunities. It's very tempting to say, no, I'm going to hide in my corner and do my science and ignore everybody else. But if you do that, you don't really come out with the skill set that you need.
Remember that science is done by scientists, kind of a thing. Also, you mentioned proposals at the very end, but you can write proposals before then. Write proposals at every step, and
go for those like, is there still the Lewis and Clark travel fellowship? Like, go for those level, right? That actually goes a long way when you're on the job market to have like a bunch of small ones. And I think just know also that we're not trained in business management and we're not trained in psychology, at least not most of us. That would be really nice if we could be. That would help a lot, I think. But right now, the way it is, we're not. And so you're going to pick it up along the way, and you're just trust yourself that, you're going to be fine. Like, none of us had any additional skills than what you had, and you'll be fine. It's kind of like exposure therapy. At a certain point, you just kind of have to like jump in and realize you can do it. And, and that gets a lot, at least for me, that helped me over the imposter syndrome too. It was just like suddenly, oh my God, I'm doing it. I guess I'm not dead yet. I haven't blown up the building. Like, okay, now it's 5 years later, so yeah. But do, make sure to really ask your network about, who you work with. Now I figured out really good, wonderful, people. But there were some interesting experiences at the beginning with collaborators, and so be sure you vet your collaborators carefully and ask your networks about them. And so that's all the more reason that it's really important to have a really big network of people you trust, like this community, and then you guys each trust people, and so you can tell people who you trust. And so spread the word on who's trustworthy and who's an ally, and then sadly there are some non-allies too. So spread the word about them too,
Okay, so I think it would be good to end like a couple minutes early. So if you guys can meet up at like 3:35 out in the stairs over here, we'll take the picture real fast. And then the next thing up, I believe, is the poster session in Mosey, for which there will be beer and cider. So that's extra reason to go look. So like 7 minutes, and then meet in the stairwell, please. Does that work? Oh yes, and thank you guys so much.